What is up, guys? Well, October is officially in the rearview mirror. Spooky season technically is over, except for those of us that do this shit year round. And per usual, it's now time to talk about all of the brand new release films that I saw in the last calendar month. And usually October is a very exciting month to do these videos. It tends to be when I watch the most movies, most new release films throughout the entire calendar year. Usually there's some really exciting, brand new, like tentpole horror films. This was an extremely weak October, not just with how I've perceived it and certainly how content has done. It's been a really slow view month for me as well, which is highly unusual for October. But apparently this is like a record-breaking bad October, where this is the lowest box office that October has seen since 1997. So we've got 15 brand new releases we're going to be talking about today, a number of which I saw at film festivals throughout this year, and even some of them that I saw at film festivals last year that are just now getting their wide release. And of the 15, there is only one film that I'm like overwhelmingly excited to talk about, where it's one of my easy favorite films of the year. And it's not a horror film, so it's a fucking weird October. Let's get going. Coming in at number 15 is a film called The Astronaut, and I saw this at South by Southwest. It was the first film that I saw during the entire festival back in like March, April, and it's like a science fiction thriller starring Kate Mara. You've got Lawrence Fishburne in here, and essentially it's about this woman astronaut who crash lands back on Earth. And they are essentially putting her through like this rehab program because she was unexpectedly crashed on Earth a little early. And it starts to realize that there's something going on with her. There's something alien, extraterrestrial that is stalking her, potentially infecting her. It's a really cool sounding premise, but the movie's very bizarre. And where it eventually goes in the last third of the film was a direction that I just found very peculiar, didn't find it particularly interesting. Certainly wasn't a great payoff for some of the building tension in the first two acts. It's not a bad film. Like, for being number 15, this is not one of those times where I just think the bottom couple are just absolute irredeemable trash or anything like that. This is just the one of those independent style films you see at film festivals that are interesting to watch, but sometimes just really don't completely come together for you. That's The Astronaut for me. Coming in at number 14 is a film called Coyotes. This was one of the movies that I saw at Fantastic Fest this year. One that I was really looking forward to because I love Justin Long, especially whenever he is in horror. For the longest time, I would tell you that if Justin Long pops up in a horror film, you could take it to the bank. This is about to be some wild, badass shit. Whether it's Jeepers Creepers or Drag Me to Hell or Barbarian or even Tusk, which is very bizarre, not a completely my thing, but is just way out there, and I'm glad that it exists. And so a movie about Justin Long and his actual real life Kate Bosworth playing a couple up in like the rich hills of LA when some fires are happening and they're trapped in their house, and then suddenly a pack of wild, ravenous coyotes are descending upon their house. That sounds like a perfect setup for a really cool little animal attack thriller, home invasion style flick. And yeah, this one just really didn't work for me. It felt like they had all the ingredients, but had no idea how to cook with them. Very clearly, they're trying to go for comedy. They're trying to go for thrills. They're trying to go for some gory animal attacks. And, some of the kills are decent, but the comedy never completely comes together for me. A couple moments where I chuckle, but certainly not a movie with the talent involved that felt like it really measured up to what they can typically do. And for all the thrills, it's kind of tainted a bit by how horrifically bad the coyotes look. It was such a bad version of CGI that before I even saw the film, the big narrative that everybody who had already previewed it before the festival started was that Coyotes is a generative AI film. Because there's basically these really uncanny valley looking coyotes that do the same exact animation of like their snarls and their growls. And so it is a level of CGI, given it's a low budget film, you can sometimes forgive that, but it's a low budget version of CGI that is so unconvincing that you do somewhat believe that somebody just typed a prompt into a computer and said, make an angry looking coyote. So that kind of kills any of the escapism of the actual premise. And the story of the film kind of sets up a number of different directions where, are they commenting on like literally eating the rich? And this is some kind of a commentary on people that live up in luxury kind of getting their just desserts. I think Eat the Rich was even part of the tagline on the poster. That doesn't really feel like much of a fully thought out piece of the film. It's just kind of there. Is the Coyotes some kind of a commentary on something in LA, like, especially given the fact that coyotes, from what I understand from people who live in LA, never attack human beings? They're like, they run away. I don't know. It was just a kind of a confusing film. Again, not like a terrible movie. It was just one that I watched with expectations to have a fun time. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't really feel like I got much out of that one. Coming in at number 13 is going to be R.L. Stine's Pumpkinhead. And the only reason that I knew this movie existed and I gave it the time of day to put it on this list is because I actually reviewed the horror film from the 80s, Pumpkinhead, a couple of weeks ago when I was kind of doing some Halloween throwback reviews. And I had said in that review that this is one of those classic, cult movies, whatever you want to call it, that I think is prime for a modern remake, especially if, and really only if, they're going to stick to a practical creature. And I had like 4 different comments being like, dude, like it's fucking, there's a remake coming out in 3 days. Go check it out. It's on Tubi. And I didn't even look at a poster, but they said it's on Tubi. I was like, oh, fuck. And so I did check it out. And even just from the graphic art or whatever, where it said R.L. Stine's Pumpkinhead, like it looked weird, but it also looked like it might actually be a remake of Pumpkinhead. Turns out it's not. It's just an R.L. Stine story that happens to share that title. This has nothing to do with Pumpkinhead. So my biggest fear was kind of alleviated at that this was going to be the only new version of Pumpkinhead that's on the docket here. But this is essentially a feature film length version of one of those classic R.L. Stine stories that we used to see get kind of shown into these little episodes on the Goosebumps show. And it's more intense than the 90s Goosebumps show, not anywhere near as intense as like the Fear Street movies or near as adult as the Fear Street movies. And, I wish I had watched it with my kids to get an idea if they liked it, because certainly they're the target audience of this. This is a kids horror film. But I thought it was decent. I thought that some of the ideas here were interesting about having this, pumpkin where somebody's like soul in their face is stuck inside of it. And, essentially they're sacrificing children to have, plentiful crops throughout this town. It's kind of a twist on like Children of the Corn with some kind of a monster movie. And I just seen a lot of movies that go for this Harvest Festival kid sacrifice monster flick thing that do it way better. Like Dark Harvest, for example, is something that kind of goes for this type of thing. That's just a way better movie. So this is one where it wasn't offensive to me. If I had watched this as a kid, probably would have ate it up. But as an adult watching it by myself, I was just like, yeah, this is a fairly innocent, inoffensive, very cheaply made long version of a Goosebumps episode that is not one of R.L. Stine's better stories. Coming in at number 12, we have The Smashing Machine, one of the biggest box office disappointments of this month, which it seems this month was basically riddled with the exception of Black Phone 2. So this is like the big career redefining moment for Dwayne Johnson, also known as The Rock, a guy that I was a really big fan of when he started making movies, when he had things like The Rundown. I even liked the Doom movie, Sue Me. I liked a lot of things that he did early on. And then he really got stuck in this rut where it felt like he was only portraying the Rock persona as a character in a movie. And they were all like these Disney-ish, family-friendly 4-quadrant PG-13 movies. And after he did that for like 5 to 7 years, people just really kind of got bored with it, as well as some other things that he said personally that rubbed people the wrong way, the way that he tried to insert himself into the DC universe and everything. Like there was a lot of things that was just like, ooh, you're making a lot of bad career choices. But as far as the movies that he's picked, even if you wash all that away, it's like, I'm not really digging the direction that The Rock is going. I hope he does something different. And this was something where when they first saw the production photos and everything of it, and they announced it, I was like, oh, awesome. This is the type of thing that I want him to do. A biopic where he actually has to get into the role, like actually has to transform to some degree. They're even using facial prosthetics to quite literally make him transform. It's a Benny Safdie film who's done some really great stuff. It's in the world of MMA, which is not too far removed from, the thing that he grew up with and the world that he grew up in with the World Wrestling Federation and everything with his father and his own career. So this had every single sign of being one of those amazing career resurgence moments that was going to potentially sweep the Oscars. And that's not going to happen, at least for the Oscar side. Maybe this is going to be a nice turning point for his career, but this is unfortunately the lowest grossing film that he has ever made. So I don't know. Everybody who's in his management team is probably telling him, get the fuck back over to Jumanji and Jungle Ship immediately. And what I will say is that this is a film that is not good. I didn't enjoy it. You know, it's something that is telling a biopic story of this guy, Mark Kerr. I believe that was his name. And I am not familiar with the guy, but I like watching biopics of people that I'm not familiar with, because that's kind of the device that's the whole point of what you're doing with a biopic, is telling the story to people that did not experience it in real time, as well as to the fans of that story. And so I was intrigued, like, what is this guy's story that's so interesting that we're making a movie and that The Rock is going to transform into him? And that was where the movie failed to me, because it's essentially just taking snapshots of this guy's life. You have this guy that has a touch of substance abuse with like painkillers and things like that, because he's in a very violent sport and he's being hurt all the time. And he's really pushing himself to try to be number one in this sport that is kind of an underground thing that has since turned into like maybe the biggest sport of all time in UFC. And he has a girlfriend that is very clearly missing some screws. And it's essentially a film about watching how this era of his life, when he's, trying to rise up through the UFC, is riddled with substance abuse at first, and then him losing a fight, not knowing how to move on from that, having a psycho girlfriend that constantly wants to fight and have all the attention on her, while he's like equally toxic in a different way. And so it's a movie that has all these ingredients that you typically see in biopics that can be very compelling, but it never really feels like it has an actual narrative through line or any kind of a narrative destination that we're invested in. Are we invested in seeing this guy be the underdog who's going to rise through the ranks by the end of it? Not really. Are we invested in watching this couple that is very mutually toxic in different increments to each other kind of get over their shit and finally become better people? Not really. It's just kind of in there. Are we watching this guy who is, the one that we're watching the whole time, who we think is going to be our hero or underdog, and it turns out his best friend, who's his trainer, is actually the underdog, and he's going to fall in the grenade to let his friend have the glory and learn this ultimate lesson? Not really. And so that was where the movie really failed for me, because it just ended up being a very slow, boring film that I never knew what direction we were heading, because the movie never really felt like it was heading anywhere. It was just kind of meandering in this guy's life for 2 hours. The Rock is very good in the movie. Like, his performance, like the thing that he would need to do to kind of rebrand himself, I think he gives everything to this movie in the way that he should. Unfortunately, everything around him just doesn't really allow that performance to shine the way that he certainly hopes that it would, and a lot of us, myself included, hope that it would. And so I really hope that he does not get discouraged. I hope he continues to do something along this line. I know he's getting ready to work with Scorsese or somebody. Maybe that will be the movie that'll do it. I don't blame people who have been shouting for The Rock to do this that also did not go out to the theater support it, because the trailers and everything just didn't really look that interesting. So good move on The Rock. I just hope that he finds a better movie to make that move in that's actually going to get what he is hoping for. Now we're at number 11, and every other movie on this list I thought was either good all the way up to my number one, which I absolutely loved. So it's really just the bottom four there that I would give a thumbs down to and would not revisit whatsoever. But number 11 is the Hulu remake of The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. And this was a film I didn't even realize was coming out, and then I was sent the screener for it, and I didn't have any interest in clicking on it until I realized it was Micah Monroe and Mary Elizabeth Winstead. And to me, that is the selling point. It's like, ooh, what are they going to do? That's cool. Love both of them. And I watched this last night, actually. It was one of the last films I watched for this list, because October's just been so miserably busy that I've been so behind. And it's fine. I don't think it's as good, as impactful, certainly not going to be as borderline iconic as the first film. I don't want to overstate the first film's legacy, but it's a pretty popular film from the 90s. It's a suitable remake that goes in some different directions, that certainly feels a bit modernized in certain ways for today's climate. Not in a way that I think is offensive to people, but is just to bring some new ingredients in there. I think that the two lead performances are good. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I think, brings it a bit more than Micah Monroe, which was a little surprising. I think that Micah Monroe is good here, but I think she's been much more convincing in other roles that I've seen her in. I don't know what it was about her character here where I just didn't quite feel that edge the way that I did from Rebecca De Mornay in the original film. And so, you got a film about somebody who is infiltrating this family and manipulating things and trying to slowly drive the wife, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, crazy. And it's entertaining enough as one of those kind of sexy thrillers that's harkening back to movies like that we really only got a ton of in the 90s. And I think that the ways that they changed the story, where in the original, we know right off the bat what Rebecca De Mornay's motivation is. This movie kind of hides it until the third act. I thought that was a little interesting, what the ultimate reveals end up being. Maybe a few too many twists by the end of it. Kind of crumbles a little bit with that, but at least an interesting enough direction that does make you go, okay, I understand why she's pissed. And I think that some of the directions they go as far as when the violence kicks in the third act, it kind of gets surprisingly violent. There's one shot in particular right before the movie ends that was really gory. And so I was like, oh shit, wasn't expecting that. So it's a little bit, a little bit heightened in that regard. But I just don't feel like that they did enough here to really make this feel like a movie that's going to make a big impact or like, show up the original film or even give the most maniacal performance of Micah Monroe or anything like that you would hope if you're just watching it for being fans of the actresses. It's just a perfectly fine Hulu version of a 90s thriller. Coming in at number 10, we have Tron Ares, a 2-hour music video by 9 Inch Nails. Now, this one's puzzling to me. I think Tron Ares is one of the main reasons why this October was just such a disaster at the box office, because it seemed like nobody else wanted to put anything like tentpole-wise in October because they expected Tron Ares to just sweep the month. Why they expected that, I have no idea, because I have not talked to a single person, even people who are fans of Tron and Tron Legacy, that thought this movie was going to be successful. I don't know why Disney thought this idea was going to be successful, why they keep trying to make Tron a thing. Not shitting on Tron. I understand it has its fans. There's some cool elements to Tron. But this was very clearly, from the moment that I saw the trailer, going to be a massive bomb. If you're somebody that had a bunch of faith in it, please let me know down below, but I have not met a single person. So Tron Ares is the third film in the Tron franchise. It's being led by Jared Leto, who unfortunately had a bunch of allegations and stuff come out too, which certainly didn't help the film. And it's essentially about Jared Leto's character, who is like the lead program inside of this evil Tron, essentially. I don't know the fucking terms for it, forgive me. And he starts to have a bit of an attack of conscience, if you will. And so he keeps being brought into the real world. There's this technology where they're able to bring the digital world into the real world. And you have Evan Peters, who is trying to essentially, it's a MacGuffin movie where him and the good company are trying to find this device, this program, to be able to sustain these digital elements in the real world. He's going to use it for evil. They're going to use it for good, and it's about who can get there first. And Jared Leto is the person who's supposed to find this for the bad people, but then you get like a Last Samurai, Fern Gully, Avatar type situation where he realizes the error of his master's ways and starts to turn everything on him. So it's an interesting enough plot while being very similar. As I just said, I stated 3 movies that this is kind of a variation of, and it is entirely held up by badass special effects and the 9 Inch Nails score, which is good. But that's not enough. That's not enough to carry this film. And so I watched it. I was entertained by it. I thought that it was cool enough. It was a fun little 2-hour visual feast. But at no point did I ever think like, oh shit, this is going to fucking rock the world. Tron is back, baby. This is going to be the one that makes Tron the big name. No. Even for Tron fans, I think they were like, yeah, that was okay. I liked the darker look that this movie had. There's a lot more blacks and like these neon reds, where I kind of more associate Tron with the color blue in the previous 2 films. So I like that. It does have like a little bit of a darker tone to it while still maintaining kind of that Disney fantastical edge. So I had fun with this one, but the fact that they spent the amount of money that they did on it thinking they were going to make any kind of a return on it is still shocking to me. Like, if you're going to make a Tron film, and I understand it's a very special effects driven film, so maybe it's an impossibility, why you would spend this much on it is baffling to me. So needless to say, if you are a fan of Tron and you loved this movie and you really enjoyed the directions they teased at the end, I don't think there's a snowball's chance in hell you're going to see what that turns out to be. I think this is the last Tron movie probably that we're ever going to have. Number 9 is Bugonia. This is the new Yorgos Lanthimos film. I saw this at one of the secret screenings of this year's Fantastic Fest. It stars Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. And essentially Jesse Plemons is this conspiracy theorist, and he believes that aliens are among us and they're going to be taking over or destroying the earth. And he believes that Emma Stone, who plays this very high up CEO of this major, I believe it was a pharmaceutical company, that she is one of them. So him and his mentally handicapped cousin kidnap Emma Stone, shave her head, lock her down in the basement, and interrogate her throughout the movie about her alien species and their plans. And so it's one of those like kidnapping thrillers. Now, what I will say right off the bat is that I'm not a Yorgos Lanthimos guy. Every film that I watch with him, I walk away going, okay, clearly a very well-made film that I don't even know if I could fully say that I enjoyed as much as I respected, and I would never watch it again. That's pretty much the experience I have with all of them. What I will say about Bugonia is, of all of the Yorgos films that I have seen, this is definitely the most accessible. This is not nearly as weird and bizarre as something like Poor Things or The Lobster, or even Kinds of Kindness. This is something that I could see more people that don't typically even bother with his films watching and being like, oh, that's cool. What else has that guy done? Oh, fuck, he made those? I also think that the lead performances are great. You know, Jesse Plemons is awesome. One of the better actors of today's age. Same with Emma Stone. She's won 2 Oscars. I don't need to validate how good she is, and she's great here. My issue is, like, the film is intriguing. The film definitely has moments that are entertaining, that are like darkly comedic, and are sometimes going for some shock value that I think work pretty well. But for me, what was going on screen was never like at this heightened level where I understood why we were spending so much time just focusing on these two actors kind of having a mental back and forth with each other. And the directions that it eventually leads to in the third act, I personally did not find to be that surprising or shocking or subversive. Other people tend to very much disagree with me on that one, and that's fine. So this is one that I watched it and I was like, okay, that was solid. Like, I would rewatch this. I can't say that about the other Yorgos films, so that is a step in the right direction. But when I walked out and I had a lot of people being like, that's the movie of the year, that's one of my favorite movies of all time, that is easily the best film of 2025, give it all the Oscars, this is one of the most amazing. When I'm hearing those type of statements, I don't understand it. You know what I mean? And I kind of felt that way about the last couple of times that the Yorgos films have had that level of hype behind them, where I'm like, really? This is the one? Okay. Well, we have very different tastes, guys. And that's fine. That's the beauty of all this. I think most people that watch this know whether it's going to be their type of film or not. You know, if you're somebody that thought Poor Things was the best thing that you've ever seen, then obviously you don't need my recommendation. You already saw this on Halloween night, which was a very bizarre, bizarre release date. If you're somebody that just doesn't get into Yorgos stuff, you might like this one a little bit more, but I don't think there's enough here that's going to wildly change your mind. So one of those movies, that classic phrase that I use, I respect more than I actually enjoy it. Coming at number 8, we have Deathstalker, and this is another film that I saw at this most recent Fantastic Fest, and this is the guy, the filmmaker that made Frankie Frico as well as Psycho Gorman, and me saying that, you immediately get an idea of what type of film this is going to be. It is that guy's sensibilities, but in like the vein of Xena Warrior Princess, Hercules, the 90s show, something like that. It's a sword and sandals, fantastical type of like Army of Darkness, just wild time. You know, this is a movie that on paper I was like, I don't know about that. And then I heard the filmmaker and what the previous stuff that he did, and I was like, you know what? I'm not typically into fantasy and orcs and elves and witches and shit like that, but that guy could make this type of thing a really wild, fun time. This reminds me of something that I would have watched in the 90s as a kid and would have loved it. If this exact movie was a VHS tape on my shelf as a kid, I can promise you it would have been one of my favorite films. And there was a little bit of an odd form of nostalgia at play with that. It's a brand new film, but there was something nostalgic about the style of it, with the puppets and the practical effects and even the gore and everything in there, the style and the comedy of the film. You got Patton Oswalt in here as like a little creature. And It's just a goofy, fun time, if this is the type of film for you. If you want to see, like, Xena the Warrior Princess with a little bit of a hard R version of Army of Darkness brought to you by the guy that made Psycho Gorman, this is absolutely going to be a treat for you. The movie did go on a little bit too long. You know, for this type of film, for this type of experience, I don't think there's any reason it should have been longer than 90 minutes. So it did start to drag a little bit, and my excitement and enjoyment of what was going on started to wane a little bit too much. But other than that, the type of movie that it is promising you, it delivers a very entertaining version of that. Coming at number 7, the biggest disappointment of this month, and a movie that will inevitably be on my most disappointing list of the entire year, is Black Phone 2. Now, I say all that, this is still a movie that I give a positive review for, that I like, and I can see myself rewatching a decent amount of times as time goes on, because it is just my type of movie. The problem with Black Phone 2 is that I absolutely adore the original. I know not everybody does, but I thought the Black Phone 2 was not only Scott Derrickson's best film yet, but that was like in competition for my favorite movie of that year, in a very stacked year. It was only dethroned by movies like X and Barbarian, and they were, you know, it's right there. So loved Black Phone. Was never convinced that there was a reason, a need, or even a understandable idea to make a sequel to Black Phone 2. Didn't surprise me when they announced it, because the first one was a very big hit, critically, fan-wise, as well as box office. And the only reason that I got a little bit of faith in it was because then they announced that Scott Derrickson and the writer C. Robert Cargill were coming back, which is not something that happened for Sinister 2, and we all know how that turned out. So I started to have more faith in this, while very much being puzzled of like, but what are we doing? Like, is this going to be a prequel, an origin for the grabber? Is the grabber going to be like a ghost or something like that, like the kids? Like, and how's that going to work? How are you going to visualize that? So I was not sure. And then when the trailer dropped, I got a whole bunch of comments and DMs, because you guys know I try to avoid most trailers, of people saying, dude, you watch a Black Phone 2 trailer? They're going Freddy Krueger with the grabber. That's all I needed to hear, and I was like, fuck yes, this movie's going to kick ass. Number 1 most anticipated, baby! And after having seen the film, and I have seen it twice, I watched it whenever it dropped in theaters as well, to kind of see how my thoughts had evolved or changed without having such high expectations for it. I was pretty disappointed. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as the first film, while still having some good stuff in here. I think that stylistically, it's a really cool looking film. I love how Scott Derrickson has really embraced like this Super 8 grainy type of aesthetic to it, especially in this one, where he's using that to differentiate between the real world and like the dream world, which I thought was a really cool choice. This one is certainly a more brutal and meaner film. It doesn't necessarily have some kills. It doesn't really have a body count in it per se, but you get some flashback type sequences to show like some of his original murders, and he fucks these kids up. We'll just say that. So that was definitely something that I thought was intriguing, that kind of had my eyes open and glued to the screen. I thought that Ethan Hawke and his return as the grabber, and the way that they visualized the grabber as quite literally some kind of type of Freddy Krueger stand-in, I actually really liked. Normally that would annoy the fuck out of me, and I'd be the one waving the flag calling it a ripoff, but I'm so Nightmare on Elm Street starved that I didn't care. I was like, this is what I want. Like, this is appetizing me for the shit that I have been missing for like 15 years, so I'm cool with it. Give me more. So you have very Nightmare on Elm Street, like Dream Warrior style sequences in here, and nightmare sequences, and I really enjoyed all of that. That was my favorite part of the film. I also thought Mason Thames and especially Madeline McGraw were incredible in this. I thought Madeline McGraw was the standout performance of the first film. I think even more so in this one. She's kind of promoted to be more the lead of this one, which was interesting, and I really enjoyed her story and her, you know, emotional motivation for what was going on, and the way that they paid that off in the end. There was a lot of people who were crying at the end of the movie, and so it's got some emotional beats in there that might surprise you. Where the film let me down heavily is that I just felt it was such a convoluted mess of a story that pretty much validated me from the beginning that there was no sensible way to come back narratively to this world and to these characters, and the entire film felt like it was trying to justify its own existence rather than just leaning into the Freddy Krueger grabber aesthetic and not being such a story-focused film and just going balls out with that. So you have like these mysteries that are set up from the beginning. that are slowly being pieced together throughout the first 2 acts. Some of it felt just incredibly over the top. Like we have letters being scratched into ice that lead to initials that lead to identities of things. And you have dead kids and these premonitions doing these things. And they spend half the movie going, who are these dead kids? And why do they have ties to the grabber? I don't know. Maybe he fucking killed them. Like, what other tie could they have to the grabber? And more so, the thing that really bugged me was these ties that go back in the past to the origins of the grabber and try to make the events of the first film more significant in hindsight than they actually were. Like, there's a reason that Finney was the one. I just didn't like any of that. To me, you're stepping on like retcon territory. And what was nice and I loved about that first film was how small and contained it was as a story. And now you're trying to like inflate the balloon way past what it can stand, and the fucking thing's gonna pop. So Black Phone 2, a movie that I think has a lot of entertainment value. There was a ton of people, more people than not, that said that Black Phone 2 was a massive improvement over the first film. And I think basically the thing that divided most people, and there was only one person I talked to at the festival that broke this, is that if you love the first one, you might not be so hot on the direction they go in the second one. If you were underwhelmed by the first one, you're going to fucking die with where they go in the second film, and you're going to be all bought in and want like 4 of these things. So, a movie I liked, a movie that definitely brought more than I thought they had to work with as far as justifying a sequel. I just wish they wouldn't have gone so convoluted with the story and just given me something where the grabber is still technically a presence out there. He's tormenting Finney, and you have to have his sister step in to try to help him battle the grabber. Like, that should have been the movie to me. All the other mystery elements and convoluted, backstory stuff, I think that's all fat that needed to be trimmed, in my opinion. Coming in at number 6, we have Good Boy. This is a horror film that I saw at South by Southwest that actually became one of the more like buzz-worthy movies throughout the year. It got a lot of buzz out of South by Southwest. Eventually got promoted to a wide release, and it was in theaters during a very weak month, unfortunately. But this is an interesting experimental type of horror film. And this is another one that I think probably leans more in the respect more than I actually enjoy it character, but I really respect what they did here. You have a horror film where your lead character is a dog. Every single scene is shown through the POV, not necessarily first person, but the dog is who you're following through this story. And it's about his house and, his master, whatever you want to call it, his owner, starting to be tormented by a seemingly supernatural presence. And the behind the scenes details that even I just heard out of South by Southwest, and I'm sure there's even more that I have not heard, on how the guy had to make this film, had to shoot it over like 4 something years because of not only like laws, I think, with working with animals, but of course, when your dog is your lead actor, you got to really work hard to get the best takes with them, and you can't just work them, 16 hours a day like you can some humans. And so this is a super passion project that was a labor of love that most people would have said, fuck that, I am not going through all the work that's going to take to make this movie even look decent. And what you have at the end is a really interesting, unique, supernatural haunted house film that's done in a way that you've never seen before. However, this is one of those films that, narratively there wasn't quite enough going on to hold my attention, and it felt like for, a film that was feature length, it probably would have been even more of an impactful experience for me if it was like a short film, like a 30, 45-minute short film. Now, I know that it was obviously just more like let's challenge ourselves to make a feature-length film with a dog, and a lot of people seem to really be loving it and really respect the hell out of that. And the respect side, certainly for me. But I was not nearly as engaged or as moved or as emotionally devastated by this movie as a number of my friends who watched it. I was just like, oh, that's really fucking cool. As a film nerd, it's interesting to me that you made a movie like this, and that's where the movie's appeal comes from. Narratively, character-wise, I wasn't as invested as some others. Coming in at number 5, we have Shelby Oaks. This is the directorial debut of YouTuber Chris Stuckman, and this was one that I got a chance to go to New York. I was invited by Neon to a Kickstarter screening to do some vlog work for them, and then have a chance to watch the film with a packed theater. And then a week later saw it at Fantastic Fest at its technical world premiere of this final theatrical cut. And there's a lot of things I need to discuss with this film. So this is what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about the film briefly. As always, I have a time code down here. I have a little slider. If you only want to hear about the film, You don't want to hear about any of the other nonsense that's surrounding it. Please, by the time I get done talking about it, scroll to the next film. I totally get it. Respect the hell out of the fact that you don't want to hear about some stupid YouTube bullshit. But there's a lot that I have to say about this movie. So Shelby Oaks is a film that was first talked about, I think like 4 years ago or something like that, where Chris Stuckman said that he's going to be pursuing filmmaking. He dropped this Kickstarter campaign, advertised it to all of his subscribers, of which he has over 2 million. And I was one of the initial backers because while I don't watch his channel too much anymore, nor do I watch any movie YouTube anymore because I spend so much time making that, I primarily watch food YouTube. But I had caught wind of it and I was like, hey, this is a cool fucking journey. I hope that he succeeds with this. Let me throw some money in. The Kickstarter campaign ended up being like a record-breaking campaign. They got like just over $1 million donated. And so Chris went off to make the film and eventually premiered it last year at Fantasia Fest, I believe. And immediately after that, Neon, one of the more prevalent horror distributors, a really big, prestigious name right now, picked up the film, and Mike Flanagan, who apparently has like some kind of a friendship or a relationship with Chris, threw his name on there as a producer and kind of mentored him a little bit on how to tweak the film after its initial screening. And so the Neon added in a little bit of money. They went and reshot a couple of scenes, mostly just to add some gore from what I understand. And now the film is being released wide this October. And when I was getting ready to watch the film, I did have some hesitance because all I had heard is like, this is a really interesting take on a found footage film. And I'm not a found footage guy. There are some found footage films that I love, like Chronicle, The Last Exorcism. There's about 4 or 5 of them. But most times when I hear found footage, I'm like, ugh, it deflates me because I expect chances are not good that I'm going to like this movie. And when I watched it, one of the things that I enjoyed most about it is that it's not really a found footage film. I feel like it's dishonest and kind of a shallow description to say that Shelby Oaks is a found footage film. It utilizes some found footage elements. There's these tapes and there's certain things like these YouTube videos that the sister, the main character, is watching, and some of it we see in like this mockumentary segment that kicks the movie off. But the vast majority of the film is not anything like found footage. It's a straight up normal narrative horror film. And so that was one of the things I liked about it most, was like, oh, cool. You utilize the best elements of found footage, the things that I like about it, without burdening me with all the things that I don't like about found footage and making that the entire template of the movie. I also thought the performances were very good, which predominantly that's all on the shoulders of Camille Sullivan, who is the lead actress. A lot of the movie is just kind of her by herself investigating stuff. I thought she was very, very good. And it was a sweetheart when I met her in real life after I reviewed it too. So that definitely helps. But yeah, she was very good for a movie that is entirely on her shoulders. She doesn't have a lot to work against for most of the film. I think for a $1 million or so movie, it looks really good. Like with the camera work, with the cinematography and the lighting and everything, it looks more expensive than it is. And that is something that was a surprise because sometimes when you see low budget films, it shows. I don't think it shows with this movie visually. Pretty much all my issues with it were in the writing stage, though. I think that there was a number of times where it definitely relied on some cliches and felt like it was taking inspiration, maybe too much inspiration from other films, and more so in the third act for me, where once the movie kind of starts to reveal what type of horror film it is, it feels inevitable, like what direction it's going. And by the end, I pretty much saw exactly where it was going. And so that certainly was a disappointment. I thought there was times in the dialogue where it didn't feel as natural as I would have liked. There's certain scenes where it feels like movie dialogue versus a conversation that human beings would be having. It's not something that happens throughout the whole film, but there were moments where I was like, I would have rewrote that scene. I also felt like you could really tell the movie's budgetary restrictions with how small scale the story is. Like there's a point where, Camille Sullivan's character goes on this journey and it really feels like her journey is contained to this very small little area where she just goes to one place and then kind of goes down the street to another place and then goes through the woods half a mile to this other place. And that made the film feel small to me in an unnatural way where it kind of breaks some of the immersion where it's like, it doesn't feel natural that all of these very significant things that are events in this film would be so close seemingly to each other. And honestly, I did wish that Chris would have taken a much bigger swing out of the gate. I really enjoy it, whether it works for me or not, when a new filmmaker breaks onto the screen and just swings for the fences. And I felt like he told a story, which, again, I understand the budgetary limitations, but it didn't feel as ambitious as I would have hoped that it was. It felt much more like a love letter to some of his favorite films and telling much more of a small-scale personal story, which I definitely appreciated that side of it too, because I could feel there was a personal element before I even got to talk to Chris, but was hoping that it was going to be one of those debuts where I go on this experience and go into certain directions and get challenged in certain ways that I'm not used to being challenged, and it's more of a safe debut than this really subversive one. The most subversive thing here is something that I liked, which is blending all these different filmmaking styles, a little mockumentary, some elements of found footage, and then like a straight up natural narrative horror film. So it was a film that I liked. You know, I wasn't going nuts about it. It got a 3.75 out of 5, and that's with the added, half a star or so of me having the bias of being somebody who was inspired by Chris and donated to the film, and got to talk to him about certain decisions before I actually recorded my review, which is something that is typically not the order of events. So there was a slight advantage that this movie got, and I want to highlight the word slight. But even with that advantage, 3.75 out of 5. That's a quarter of a star higher than Halloween 2018, a movie that I am widely known as a hater of.
Yeah! He glazing like a...
It's a solid debut, in my opinion. I think that it's something that shows that Chris has talent as a director, has a lot of room to grow as a writer if he's going to continue to write and direct his films. But for the type of film that it is, with the budget that it had, and the expectations that I had walking into it, I thought it was solid. Now, with that being said, I saw it coming a mile away. You know, I talked about it with people that I know in this space, that this movie was going to be a bit of a nightmare to review, because I knew there was going to be people on one side that are like hardcore Stuckman fans that are going to come at every single person that says anything negative about it. And there's, of course, going to be people that are Chris Stuckman haters that are going to come at every single person that says anything above its irredeemable trash that's the worst movie of 2025. And even with me knowing that that was inevitable, because the internet is fucking predictable as anything out there, I was shocked, totally taken aback at the level of toxicity surrounding this film. 95% of the conversation and discourse surrounding this film on YouTube is not even about the film itself. It's about Chris Stuckman. It's about people that don't like him, never liked him, people that hated his Batman v Superman rewrite tweet, whatever the fuck that was, people that are like offended to this day that he doesn't do negative reviews and they feel betrayed, or, you know, feel like he's destroying film discourse, people that are jealous at the fact that he went from being a YouTuber to now having a film that has a wide release, people that are angry that he kickstarted his film instead of funding it himself, or, you know, pushing to get in the studio system, whatever reason that people have a bone to pick with Chris Stuckman. That was way more prevalent, way more toxic, and like shockingly cruel than I would have ever expected it to be. Don't get me wrong. If you watch this film and you didn't like the film, your opinion is totally valid. If you walked into this with good faith, or you didn't even know who Chris Stuckman was and you walked out going, yeah, that wasn't for me, that is totally valid. I did not expect this to be a runaway hit, and clearly I'm somebody who's kind of in the mixed positive range. There are people that are walking out loving it. Like, people are acting like this guy ran around cities and like punched pregnant women in the face and took money out of their purses to fund this film or something. Like, the level of hate that is surrounding this guy, I didn't realize was there. I knew people were frustrated and annoyed and had opinions on his decision to not make negative reviews anymore. Fuck. I put out a video talking about his Madam Web video where I expressed my thoughts on it. But people are acting like this guy is the scum of the earth. Like, they don't want him to just fail. They want this guy's entire career and aspirations to crash and burn in front of him while we all dance and hold hands in a circle celebrating it. What the fuck? I actually saw people like posting videos and posting tweets celebrating the moment that this dipped from a 60 on Rotten Tomatoes to a 59, which changed it to a rotten score. I think it ended up leveling out around 57. I've never seen that before. Not even for something like Snow White that had a ton of negative discourse around it. This was like people waiting and just in bated breath for the moment that they could shoot fireworks, that this thing was, to them, deemed a failure. And that toxic shit didn't just stop at Chris. It bled over onto all of us that covered the film and didn't give a highly negative review for it, especially those of us that either were at Fantastic Fest or went to one of these Kickstarter screenings. There was this big narrative being brewed among people that very clearly don't like Chris Stuckman, had nothing to do with the fucking film, that we were either being paid off or that Chris was putting money in our pocket and trying to fly us out personally and whining and dining us all before watching the film, or we have some kind of a vested interest, like if we give the film a positive review, suddenly we're going to be able to make our own movie next year or some weird shit. Like all these ridiculous, irrational, bullshit, easily proven to be factually untrue things that were just wafting around the internet. And so the big predominant narrative that took over for about a week and a half was anybody who shits on the film gave it an honest review, and anybody who praised it or was mixed on it was paid off, is a friend of Chris's, or is trying to get some kind of form of clout or some kind of a quid pro quo. You even had a ton of small channels trying to capitalize on this as some kind of a controversy or some way to like prop themselves up. You know, there was people that would make thumbnails with me and or Sean Chandler in the thumbnail with like fake reviews, paid reviews, fake praise, things like that. And that's fine. You know, there's a reason why you have 1,000 subscribers after 500 videos. That's what people with no talent end up with. And I could spend an hour poking holes into every single argument, every single statement, every single narrative that I saw being painted, even just at me specifically, but even at others, where they're saying, this person said this, and you watch their video and they say clearly the opposite of that. But I'll say this. One, if you think that I have a lack of integrity, if you think that I'm the type of person who can be paid off for an opinion or would be hesitant or scared or somehow nervous to give my honest, unfiltered opinion on any movie, I don't know what channel you've been watching, but clearly you shouldn't watch me anymore. If that's your opinion of me, I don't know why you would continue to watch me, because I wouldn't watch somebody that I felt that way about. But you'll still be there because you know it's bullshit. You just like to hate watch. The other thing that I will say, in regard to the prospect of me being wined and dined or influenced to give the review that I gave, there's a film that I watched that I had a personal direct communication line with people that made it, that literally offered me a role in their next film. And I gave their movie a negative review, completely destroying that potential. I have another set of filmmakers that I would consider myself to be friends with, not just acquaintances, that have done a lot of things for me, have had personal conversations with them, asked them for advice on certain things, on prospects for the future of where I want to go, and have done a lot of really cool things with them. And I gave one of their films a negative review. I was the Rotten Tomatoes review that dropped it from 60% to 59%, that has now branded that film as rotten on Rotten Tomatoes ever since, which felt shitty and was not my intention. But when I dropped my honest review for it, that is what happened. Chris Stuckman is a YouTuber that I respect. Chris Stuckman is a YouTuber that for a long time I did enjoy and watch a lot of his videos. He's a guy that I have met on 2 different occasions and has always been a really nice guy to me and has said some nice things about my channel and has certainly been encouraging. I don't have anything negative to say about the guy as far as my experience with him, but that's as far as our relationship goes. There's no real motivation for me to give this movie a positive review if that was not my honest experience with the film. If I didn't like his movie, would it have been awkward? Yeah, it would have been awkward, but it would have got a negative review. But there's nothing about my relationship to Chris Stuckman or my experience with Chris Stuckman that is some like wildly different experience that I've had with other filmmakers that would force me to lie about my opinion on his film or inflate it to the point where I went from a somewhat negative review to a somewhat positive review. There's no advantage in that for me. In fact, it's nothing but disadvantages, because for one, I would have avoided all of the toxic bullshit that has been going on over the last 2 weeks easily. I would have been hailed as one of the honest reviews. You're so brave for giving this a fucking 1 out of 5. But also, as we all know, a thumbnail with me looking upset and giving Shelby Oaks a negative review, especially given that I'm a YouTuber who has hung out with him, that video would have done 3 times the amount of views as the one of me saying, yeah, it's pretty good. So, movie got its wide release. It didn't blow anything up by any means. You know, it wasn't something that people were really talking about outside of YouTube. It debuted at 7 or 8 or something. I think they made their money back pretty quickly, which is good. And I'm sure that they're really happy about that. But I'm sure they're all a bit disappointed on how the film has gone. Not only with just the review scores, but with the financial return of it. But I'm sure Chris is going to get to work again as a director, and I hope that that film is even better than Shelby Oaks. I just really hope some of you guys that are being pathetic fucking weirdos find something else to be pathetic fucking weirdos about, because it is very odd to me to wish for somebody's failure who has dreamed about being a filmmaker, got a chance to do it, and slipped out of the gate for a lot of you. It's not the only filmmaker that has done that. And for as much as the narrative out there is that everybody has got some positive bias towards this because of Chris Stuckman, I promise you, the amount of negative bias out there where people are walking in this wanting to hate it, significantly higher. Coming at number 4, we have Good Fortune. This is like a dramedy with Seth Rogen, Aziz Ansari, and Keanu Reeves, where Keanu Reeves is a guardian angel. Aziz is somebody who's super down on his luck, living out of his car, losing jobs, and owes all this money. And then you have Seth Rogen, who's kind of like your tech bro, who's very selfish and just sits around and like tans and does cold plunges and goes to these wild parties and has no sympathy for anybody that's on hard times. And Keanu Reeves, the guardian angel, essentially switches their lives. So it's kind of like a twist on It's a Wonderful Life mixed with Trading Places from the 80s. Now, what I will say is that for the especially really funny people involved with this film, I wished it was a little funnier. I didn't have many laugh out loud moments. I chuckled a few times. I smiled throughout it, but I wish it was more successful with the comedy side of things. But that's really the main negative with the movie for me. Other than that, I actually thought this was a really well-told story. I thought that the 3 actors here are really enjoyable in their characters. Their interactions with each other are really fun. Keanu Reeves is great as this guardian angel who's like totally oblivious and ignorant to how things work and slowly has to kind of learn about the human condition. And I just really enjoyed the message at the heart of this film. Of course, you have the one where the guy who is down on his luck has to learn that money does not solve all of your problems, and sometimes the hardships of life is actually that special spice that a lot of us don't appreciate in the moment, but you look back and that creates some of your most cherished memories, is the trials and tribulations that you've been through and you making it through the other side and becoming a stronger, better, more successful person. But also Seth Rogen is somebody who does not value a lot of things and just kind of lives this high life lifestyle, starting to understand how he can impact others more in a positive way and not be so self-centered and selfish. But especially the one with Keanu Reeves, which was a bit of a surprise for me, where he's a guy that because he does this little fuck up kind of has to lose his wings for a while until the situation resolves. And so he has to become human. And so you even have an angel learning all these special little things about the human experience, the taste of a cheeseburger, the taste of a milkshake, going and working a 9 to 5 and having most of your money taken out for taxes for reasons you never quite understand. And I just thought it was a movie that really holds a microscope over the human experience in a lot of different ways and the different aspects of life that a lot of us tend to take for granted, both good experiences and bad experiences, when that's all the ingredients that makes up how wonderful life is. So again, I wish I laughed a bit more. If I had laughed more, this would easily be my number 2. And maybe even have potential to be my number 1. But as is, it was a nice little feel-good movie with some actors that I really enjoy that told a really nice story. And I walked out feeling better about life, better about being a person. And hey, I'll take that. Coming at number 3, we've got Bone Lake. Now, this is a film that I saw at last year's Fantastic Fest that just now got its wide release. The only thing that I saw that was different was the opening was changed. Other than that, it's the same film that I saw. And I like this movie. This was one that's kind of like a more seductive, sexy, adult version of Speak No Evil, where you have these 2 couples that come to this Airbnb. They've been double booked. And rather than one of them fucking off and going somewhere else and having their vacation screwed up, they decide to just share it. It's like, I get a good vibe off of you. Let's just all hang out. This house is big enough. And right off of the bat, just like with Speak No Evil, one of the couples is very awkward in the way that they are kind of crossing the lines of social interactions. But where in Speak No Evil, it's like them putting them in really uncomfortable situations and like being a little bit over over angry about certain things and pushing them to do things they don't want to do. In Bone Lake, it's more so about sexual advances. One couple, the husband coming under the wife and vice versa, and them being a little bit more flirtatious, and that slowly building awkwardness and tension in that respect. And then the movie just goes balls out, carnage candy in the third act. So this is a fun one. This is one that I think is not, it didn't make a huge splash, unfortunately, but when it comes to VOD, I think there's going to be a lot of people who discover it. And it's not going to have the notoriety of Speak No Evil because it's not quite as inherently shocking or gut-wrenching, but it's a more fun, enjoyable, and dirtier version of that type of movie that I had a really good time with. Coming in at number 2 is a movie that I saw a little bit early, and that is Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. Now, this is a film that's being released on Netflix, I believe, on the 7th, so you'll be able to watch it at home here very soon, but they did like a limited theatrical run, and when it first released, it was nowhere near me, but the last week of October, they expanded it to my local theater. Just got a chance to go to the theater after Halloween wrapped up and check this thing out. And this is another film that, with some tweaks, could have easily had been my number 1, but obviously being number 2, I liked it quite a bit. Now, Guillermo del Toro is a guy that oftentimes makes movies that fit that respect more than I enjoy category. I think he's a very visually driven filmmaker. His movies always look amazing. Sometimes it feels a little style over substance to me, so I wasn't sure what to expect with this one, as well as the fact that Frankenstein is one of those stories that has been retold so many times. It's like, what new are you going to bring to it? And what I will say is that this is an extremely well-made version of the classic Frankenstein story that is driven by a really talented visual filmmaker, an incredible cast, really great like costume design, set design, period piece detail, and all of that I really got into for the characters and the emotional ties between them, both negative and positive. It's a very character-driven film to me, which is something that I would not classify as style over substance. There's a lot of substance here. So you have a film here that's told in chapters. The first chapter, which is 45 minutes, an hour long or whatever, is telling the story of Victor Frankenstein, played by Oscar Isaac, in an incredible performance, and his journey to kind of explore reanimating the dead and eventually creating Frankenstein's monster. And then the second chapter is telling the story from the perspective of Frankenstein's monster, who's played by Jacob Elordi in another incredible performance, and kind of his experience with the whole thing and how he looks at life and how he feels about himself and the things that he learns about the human condition and the things that he starts to desire. And the biggest negative with the film for me is that there is a third piece of this story where, after everything comes to its biggest points of contention, where the monster turns on Victor Frankenstein and starts to hunt and torment him out of like revenge for creating him and damning him to this life of pain and misery. And I felt like that section of the movie was way too short for how long and how, I wouldn't even say slow, but how deliberately paced the previous sections of the story is. And for being a 2 hour and 20-minute film, I almost want to see the 2 hour and 45-minute version of this that fleshes out that piece of the movie more, because not only is that where you get a lot more of your excitement and a lot more of your tension from, but it felt like quickly getting through that kind of undermines some of the emotional buildup from both of these characters waiting for that point of contention. So that was my biggest negative with the movie. But that being said, I really enjoyed what we got here. I think that there's a really interesting take on this story and the creature, especially, not just with the look, but with the way that he's visualized. He's a very intimidating and scary version of the Frankenstein monster, but also the way that it really dives into his human desires, his human emotions, and the melancholy sadness of his existence that I thought was really potent here. And the way that the movie's paced out for being a 2 hour and 20-minute film, I was never really bored with it. There was a section in the first 30 minutes where it's focusing more on Victor Frankenstein as being like more of a student and things like that, and even trying to kind of profess to people his findings, that I slowly started to doze off a little bit, but I was also just extremely tired. As soon as you get to where he's starting to build shit and you get some of the more gore elements of him taking apart body parts and everything, I immediately woke up and was engaged the entire time. The music and the dialogue especially too, like with the storytelling here, the dialogue is very poetic, especially from Frankenstein's monster, in a way that I thought was really well done. So if you're a fan of Guillermo del Toro, I'm sure you're going to love this. If you're a fan of the Frankenstein stories, the variations of them, this is a really cool new version of it. I don't know if we're going to get like a director's cut or even if one exists. It feels like that section of the movie was cut down a bit. But if we ever do get one, like Netflix has sometimes done with Tarantino's movie, I would rather watch that version of the film because that was the only thing that was a slight disappointment for me. Was like, fuck, I wanted to be in that section a bit longer before the credits rolled. But coming in at number 1 by a landslide, my favorite film of October, and a movie that is probably going to be in my top 10 safely unless we just have a kick-ass couple of months left in 2025. And I actually hope that's the case. And that is Roofman. This is a Channing Tatum comedy, drama, biopic type film, true crime type film. And this is one that I saw the trailer ahead of some movie back in like, I don't know, August or whatever. And I was like, that looks cute. Maybe that'll be fun. And walked into it with, modest expectations, just expecting to have a decent time at the movies. And I was totally taken by surprise by how much I loved this. Not only did I love the comedic beats and how fun and charming the characters, Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst's chemistry and everything is, just the inherent comedy of the situation, but was really surprised with how emotional I got. Like when you start to get to pieces of the movie where the reality sets in, it really affected me in a way that I did not expect. But it's essentially telling the true story of this guy, Jeffrey Manchester, a shockingly true story, one of those like stranger than fiction type stories where in the late 90s through the early 2000s, he was known as the Roofman or the Roofman robber, where he would cut a hole in the roof of mostly McDonald's, but other fast food restaurants, wait inside, and then like be a friendly robber where he would not hurt anybody. He would do things to like make sure they're comfortable, but take money. And eventually he went to jail, was caught for this, escaped from jail, and then hid out in a Toys R Us for 6 months while living a double life, having a full-on relationship, having a role inside of this church and everything before eventually being caught again. And this is just an amazing series of events to watch unfold that, I did my due diligence and kind of checked it out. There's some tiny skewed details, but overall is a pretty faithful representation of how ridiculous the real life story is, where you're watching it going, this has to be bullshit, and it's not. So that in and of itself makes for a very fun, entertaining movie. But this is by far, in my opinion, the best work that Channing Tatum has done to this point. I've always liked him. I think he's one of those actors that gets better the more that he works. But this movie, I think, puts all of his strengths on display in the strongest form that I have seen, where he's genuinely funny and charming. You're having laugh out loud moments at just his character and his persona. You have really good dramatic beats, especially when the reality sets in, as I said, and you get some really emotional stuff with his actual family and this family that he has now got this tie to and had a relationship with for 5 or 6 months. And his chemistry with Kirsten Dunst is amazing. She's great in this movie too. It was a movie that I was smiling ear to ear the entire time. And then even when you got to the more emotionally devastating sides of it, and even when you're starting to understand the message of the movie, which is more so of like, you're not a good guy just because you're nice. Like if you're doing bad things that hurt people and you're doing bad things that cause life to be worse for other people, either directly or indirectly, being a friendly, polite guy does not mask that. Like I just thought there was so much more here, so much more to chew on, so much more to walk away discussing than I would have expected, when a movie that advertises just being kind of like this fun little romantic, quirky comedy. And so this is one that of many of the movies that I've seen this year, this is the one that I have seen that I can see myself rewatching most often. Like it has that feel-good movie aspect to it, but it also has that emotional payoff and that challenging discussion and discourse that you walk away with, and a movie that kind of challenges how you look at certain things that I really appreciated. So this is one of the biggest surprises of the entire year. And I encourage you, if you have not already seen it, it's probably still in some theaters, but definitely check it out when it comes to VOD, because I was just totally taken by surprise by how much I really loved this one. Well, that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and please check out all these movies if they sound interesting to you. If you like this video and check out some more, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews and a playlist of all of these month wrap-ups I've done so far this year. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.